start recording now. Just heads up. And then also for the panelists, would you all mind changing your names to afterwards put your company in parentheses, or just panelist if you prefer, so people can easily identify who the panelists are? Okay, cool. So I'll give us a second to do that, and then we'll get into kind of our group questions. So we're going to start out with 3 different questions. Each are going to be directed at 2 the different panelists, and y'all can just, feel free to choose who goes first, or somebody just jump at it, whatever. So the first question is, how would you describe product management, and what role do you play in your company as a product manager? This is for Tim and Olivia.
Awesome. Olivia, do you want me to go first, and then you want
I
to
would
jump
love
in
that.
second? All right,
Yeah.
cool. So how would you describe product management, and what role do you play in your company as a product manager? So, I would start off by saying that, product management, I always think of the 4 rights. And so you're trying to build the right product for the right people at the right time through the right channels, or, right place, right market, whatever you want to say, right? And that's really how I see the product role in interfacing with, especially if you're at a software company, the engineering teams are the teams building the products, the market facing teams that are actually going and selling or trying to get that product out to the market, and making sure that you're building the right stuff. And so, like at data.world, really focusing a lot on understanding what our customers' needs are, talking with them, interfacing with them, understanding the key folks that work at data.world, like our salespeople, our customer success people, our implementation people. What are they trying to accomplish? How do they have to work with our various enterprise customers? And then really building out that plan and that roadmap that we can execute as a company. So that's kind of how I see product management. Obviously, that's like the high level, but there's so many details that happen that have to make that work: the collaboration, the politics, the systems, the tools, which I'm sure that as a group we're all going to get into here. But I'll at least start us off with that. And then, unique to the data.world is my role as a product manager there is I'm actually more of a strategic project manager or product manager. I don't necessarily have to play the product owner role, which is a more sort of hands-on role working with the team. If you're familiar with Scrum methodology, then, really sort of managing the sprints and things like that really is kind of key to the product owner. And that's not a role that I play at data.world. I get to work a little bit more at the roadmap level, the strategic level, but work very closely with those different product owners. So a little bit, specific to data.world. I know depending on the company, things look a lot different. So yeah, I'll kind of start us there. Olivia.
Awesome. Yeah. So I agree. And also peculiar to Intel, I also I'm not in any sprints. I'm very high level. And I say part of that is because at Intel, it's kind of clear what our product is going to be. It's going to be whatever the fastest, fanciest chip we can make with the least nanometers possible. So I don't have to worry so much about what is the product going to be. I kind of have a sneak peek, but I try to worry about optimizing supply and demand and who's going to take what and how we're going to get it into their hands. And just get the story of the best processors in the world across. I also am very operations focused, so I don't have my hand in the marketing pot too much. I never found myself to be quite this talker, so that works for me. I consider my product management very much just being a data steward. So when people have questions, I try to have the answer and have that answer with data. So that's mostly what I see myself as a product manager.
Awesome. Thank you all both so much for that. And Tim, a quick question, just spontaneously, but I noticed you accidentally mentioned project instead of product manager. Could you go into the differences between those 2 things, just for everyone who might not be aware?
Yeah, sure. And I feel like, I'm sure all the other product managers here can attest. There's plenty of things to discuss when you start to compare product managers from product marketing managers, and then product engineering managers and development managers. And oh my gosh, all the roles and responsibilities. And how do we not step on each other's shoes, right? But, specifically project management versus product management. I think that a lot of times as a product manager, you actually do need to have project management skills, and that ends up being a really key part of what you do. But typically a project manager in various companies, including at data.world, they're focused on specific initiatives. Like that might be a particular customer project or customer implementation. It might be a particular program. For example, we have an integration program at data.world where you need to integrate with a lot of different tools and technologies. That's something where we're actually in the process of hiring a project manager to run that, a technical project manager. Whereas really product owns either a part of or an entire product, right? And really driving, things at that product level sort of holistically. So that would be my kind of way of talking about the difference of those two things.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim. And before we move on, I want to call out, I'm about to send a link in the chat for a feedback form. Just at the end of the panel, I'll send it again. Just it's for an initiative the Undergraduate Business Council has, our analytics committee, to make sure that our events are going well and to see how we can improve. So I'd appreciate it if everyone can either open that now or just open it at the end, where I'll send it at the panel again, and just put in feedback, what you thought of the event, what you thought you can improve, stuff like that, just so we can continue to improve and hold these kinds of events. With that said, we'll move on to the next question, which is, what's been your favorite project or the coolest thing you've worked on? And that's for Sarah and Chris.
Let's see. Chris, do you want me to go or you?
You can go for it. I saw you come off mute, so I'll
okay.
I'll
I
go second.
I couldn't see you on the panel come off mute. I was like, I can't see it. So I think for me, the coolest product that I've supported really has been Hyperforce, which is what I currently support. I started at Salesforce as an MBA intern, and I was staffed on Hyperforce, which actually didn't even have a name at that point in time. We knew what we were doing. We were putting Salesforce on public cloud. We knew exactly why we were doing it, but we really didn't know, other than some strategic customers who are under NDA, how much are we actually even going to talk to customers about this new product that we're doing, which is essentially a new product that our infrastructure will be a new platform for all of Salesforce to run on. And I think for me, I am a non-functional PM, so I essentially support reliability, infrastructure, what we would call trust at Salesforce. So performance, availability, reliability, security, basically reliability engineering is kind of what I've focused on. It's not the most glamorous side of PM. I love it. It's something that I feel called to. It's something I think I'll spend the rest of my career in, but it's not the type of PM that normally makes the big announcements. It's not the fun, click the button type of PM. And so, we were sitting there and we were planning on this. We'd actually launched part of the India region, and we're still pretty quiet about it. I remember sitting there with legal and marketing and engineering leadership, and they were saying, we really want to keep this more under wraps. And there's a lot of reasons for why. And then in November, I was actually sitting in this exact chair on a meeting with my VP, and he said, we just heard that Mark Benioff, who's the leader of Salesforce, wants to make Hyperforce, which is, we had given it a name like a week before, one of his key announcements at Dreamforce, which is our biggest industry conference, kind of, so we call it like Salesforce Homecoming or Salesforce World. And it's just been an amazing whirlwind since then. I mean, to be able to talk about it with customers openly, to hear Mark say in front of thousands of people at the Dreamforce keynote that he views it as the biggest technical change we've made to the Salesforce platform in 20 years, to help our executives prep to speak on an investor relations call about it. I think it's just, not only has it been an amazing project and so in line with my skill set with working on the public cloud, but also pulling in sort of the technical side and the business side of having an MBA and doing everything from how does this affect Salesforce's stock price, to how does this change how we talk about an MSA agreement, to how does this change how we market things. It's been a really broad product to support. And so I've loved it, and I'm excited to support it as we launch new regions.
Hard to follow that up, but I will try. I guess to give a little context first, I very much am the fun click the button PM type here. I spend about half my job strictly focused on long-term company strategy and, how do we drive specific business goals? And then the other half on, what does that strategy actually look like? And how do I work with my engineering teams to make sure that strategy gets properly implemented in features and products and, ongoing from there. So just a little context, but I think it's really important because as you've noticed, every PM up here, our job is drastically different, and that's the industry right now. And then to kind of talk about, favorite projects I've worked on. So I was very fortunate right after college before I started in product, actually going to product design consulting. So I got the chance to work with a ton of really cool startups doing everything from, 3D printing of houses to AR and VR stuff to working with Amazon and Facebook. And it was awesome. But I really did not get to drive kind of that end-to-end vision, that end-to-end strategy, which is what I was really looking for. And that's what kind of propelled me into product. And so now as a product manager, while I kind of look back on all those cool, fun projects and they were awesome, the ones that really stick with me as kind of my favorite to date are ones where, we've identified problems and gotten to work directly with our customers, our agents, home buyers and sellers, since that's kind of my target market, and figuring out what their problems are, figuring out how we're going to solve those, pitching that to our president, our CEO, getting buy-in across the org on these big projects, and then distilling those down into here's actually what the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months looks like, and working with engineering to make sure that that's met, and design, obviously, and all these other stakeholders. And so one project that really fits that nature right now is a fairly new project, but we're looking to add some new kind of features and products to our platform that will really let somebody buy or sell a home completely from their phone, kind of digitizing this entire transaction. It's a lofty goal. That's why nobody's really done it to date. And it's been a really, really fun project to work on, because it's really tough when you say, hey, we want somebody to, buy a house on their phone. Like, that's not something that just happens in a couple months. And so getting buy-in, identifying the problems, working with leadership to make sure that this is what we want to do. And now we're finally in the stage of starting to design and develop that. It's been a whirlwind. It's been fun. It's been challenging. And I definitely have to say that that's really what not only brought me to product, but it's what I've enjoyed the most thus far. So.
Awesome. Thank both of y'all for those very detailed, enthusiastic replies. The next question that we have, this is for the remaining two panelists, Daniel and Madiha, is how did your college experience give you the skills to be a successful product manager? What soft or hard skills do you use, and would you recommend people to try to learn to help them become product managers?
Okay, I'll take it. Okay, cool. So my college experience was definitely a little bit different. I came from a sales and entrepreneurship background. So throughout kind of my couple of years in college, I got the opportunity to launch my own startup with a team, and we partnered with NASA. I got to launch a med spa in Houston and work for a tech startup that was tech focused, but with farming. So I really got exposure to different sides of the business, from sales to business strategy and a little bit of engineering. And having those multiple hats really allowed me to engage in like meaningful conversations with different people. And when I came on board, I had a more human-centric approach to things, to ideas, in comparison to my team, who was very data-driven and data-focused. And so we were able to really balance each other out. And I came in thinking a lot about the user strategy. Okay, how is this going to close deals? And from that perspective. And so when I think about first soft skills, thing that really helped me is one, be curious, like ask questions. If I tell you, like, I onboarded on January and I have a whole notebook of literally just questions and understanding, like, what does this mean? What does this technical thing mean? And those, like, being open and being honest will honestly get you a long way. And understanding to know like what you know and know what you don't know. And for me, it's a still steep learning curve, and I'm still learning. And even with the hard skills, for me, looking back, even a couple of months, I think the two things that I feel like in my position that would be really beneficial is one, learning about UX UI design, and two, data analytics. And again, these are things for me I feel like would really help, but they're not deal breakers. Most of the technical skills that I'm learning right now are on the job, and YouTube has been my best friend. Books have been really helping me. One of them I really like is Hooked, and the other is The Design of Everyday Things. So those two things have really been keeping me up to date. But I think the biggest thing is be transparent and be honest with what you know and what you don't know, and that learning curve will come.
So I think a lot of the best answers that I would have were already taken in that one. But I think a couple of the things I would emphasize there, like certainly it's really helpful to have a background and a competency in UX and in data. And I think something that Madiha was implying and one that I'd like to emphasize that you can really develop in college is just this idea of leadership. I've not met a really talented product manager or like product director who wasn't also a very talented leader. And typically when I'm giving feedback to people who are trying to apply to product management and they ask me like, oh, what technical skills do I have to have? Or what language should I learn? I usually give them the feedback that like, it's much more impressive on a resume to see that you created a startup or you led an event for a student organization or something like that, where you actually had to communicate with stakeholders and lead a team, because that's something that you do in product management all the time. Whereas understanding how the intricacies of some programming language work, that's usually not, at least in my role, been all that relevant. It's certainly helpful, but not the most important thing. And then the other thing I'd emphasize is this idea of like communication. Again, just the ability to distill really complex ideas into very simple, understandable thoughts, because so much of this job is really communicating and herding sheep, is so much easier if you're an effective communicator, if you lead with empathy, and if you like take time not only to understand something, but then to be able to communicate it back, depending on what level of context each person has, depending on the different incentives and goals that people you're working with have. And I found that those two things have been really, really helpful, regardless of the technical skills that you may have.
Thank both of y'all. Great responses those are. And then, so this next question that we're going to do, it'll be for all the panelists. Y'all don't have to answer, but feel free to. Some of you have kind of talked about this like a little bit, which is, how did you get into product management or land your first role? How did you transition into it? So feel free if you want to speak up and kind of elaborate more on how you got into it. Being, especially from like a college student perspective, it seems like a very kind of elusive field, like hard to get into. Like, how do you get that experience without already having the experience? Competitive, all those kind of things. So if you want to share more about specifically how you landed your first role and how you got into it, if you think it'll be insightful for them, anybody, feel free to speak up.
I can go if nobody else wants to jump in, but this one I think is really important because in my particular instance, I didn't know what product management was 3 years ago, probably. And what product management is today was drastically different than what a lot of people thought it was 3 years ago. It's rapidly changing. So, my experience, I just kind of want to point out, like, it's probably going to be very different than all the other panelists. But, when I first jumped out of college, I was in product design consulting. I did hardware stuff. I didn't work with software at all. I didn't know anything about it. And then I found out what product management was and was super, super interested. And, typically what I was told is, the way you get into this is you go to a startup, you kind of wear a lot of hats, you become a PM, or you go to another company and you do another role and you transition into product. And for me, it was very different. What I kind of credit, my jump into was, and this was mentioned earlier, was being super, super curious. So there's resources out there to learn what product is. There's YouTube, there's books, there's free information online, and then there's talking to people, right? I talked to, I don't even know, probably 50 product managers on LinkedIn before I ever even interviewed for a job, because I didn't even know if that's what I wanted to do or what it was, or, what company I wanted to work for. And so being curious is probably the biggest part of it for me, at least. And then the second thing I did was I knew that I wasn't going to get one of these roles that I was applying for if I couldn't show I could do the job. And there's a lot of ways to do this. The way I personally did it and how I've kind of recommended to other people is, designers, software engineers, when they apply for a job, they have a portfolio, they have projects they've done. For product, you don't see that very often. And I interview a lot of product managers and I still very rarely see this. And so what I actually did was I did a couple case studies just on companies I liked. I did one on, I think, Uber. I think I did one on Keller Williams, actually, which is where I ended up working. And I just said, hey, I've used your technology. I'd say, here's a cool problem that I see that I don't see as addressed. Here's how I would solve that problem. And just kind of walk through it very casually, not very in depth. And as I did these, I learned, what it was like to be a PM, and not just that, but what kind of things I like to do as a PM. And, it's very high level, very kind of educational, but just doing these case studies, sharing them with people was what actually ended up getting me an introduction to somebody who said, hey, would you be interested in interviewing for a job here? And, that's how I kind of, fell into this role. It's not a traditional route. It wasn't I'm just going to apply and say, hey, I have these skills that I think translate. It was being curious, learning it on my own, talking to people, and trying to show I could do the job. So
that's a really cool approach, Chris. I haven't heard of that sort of portfolio approach before, and now it's making me think like, maybe that would have been a faster way to get into this field had I approached it that way. But I for me, it was actually kind of more that former path that you alluded to, which was the kind of winding road path to product management, which is I actually started coming out of college. I worked for a technology company, and it was a marketing role, and it was called product evangelist, but it was really more of a marketing role. And that was like the first opportunity to be like working with technology and learning. I love the comment about curiosity. I also love Daniel, what you kind of mentioned about really like, and Madiha as well, like learning on the job and really like having to be applying, just being agile to whatever it is that you need to be an expert on in the moment. And the kind of thing that I joke about is, and I feel like a lot of PMs in the industry joke about this, is like the first step to become like the path to becoming a PM is first you have to have 5 years of experience in product management. And so like, I think the portfolio approach is interesting because it's like, how do I demonstrate that I have, experience in this and that you can trust me? Because I think the hardest part with a product manager is like, you need to be somebody who can trust. It ties into that whole leadership thing. So like for me, after I did that marketing role, I started a startup. And so that startup got accepted by Capital Factory. That's actually why I came down to Austin. And then that company ended up getting acqui-hired by another company, and then that company got acquired. So that was like a fun little mini journey. And then it became something that I could be like, hey, look, like I started this company, like that went for a couple of years. I designed that product. That product then got acqui-hired by another company, and then I had to design that product, and I had to be the product manager for that. And even though like only half of that arc really was me having the title of product, I got to kind of look at that as like, hey, this is my 5 years of experience, and kind of allowed me to get into like an actual interview process for product management. So just sort of another example, but at its core, it's kind of a similar thing, right? How do I demonstrate my experience?
Yeah, and just to echo, I think what you both are saying in terms of trust in your portfolio, I graduated this December, and so I understand the market is tough. Like applying to jobs in general is just very different these days. So I really empathize with y'all that it's going to be hard, but one thing that I realized through my process, like I didn't know about product until last summer. One of my friends, he sent me the Facebook rotational product management role. And I was like, wow, this is something that I see myself in, the product, the role. It really, really like interested me. And long story short, first round, I got rejected. They told me that I didn't have enough experience. And so I'm like, okay, what am I going to do with that? I wasn't going to stop trying to figure out my role. Like I wanted to work in product. And so for me, coming from a sales background, like a no is just closer and closer to that yes. And so I basically had a mentor who was a PM, and he recommended, okay, why don't you take this design course with IDEO, really cool design firm. That's pretty prestigious. So look into that if you guys are interested. And he's like, just take a course, get like some insights into what design thinking is. And so I got that course, and I'm like, okay, now let me go apply again. And I applied a bunch of times, and, like the whole cyclical process, like I got multiple rejections, and I'm like, okay, keep going. Like this application process is hard, and that's something that you guys will go through, and that's okay. And the last opportunity, my mentor had connected me with this woman who is the chief product officer of this company called Spekit. And he was like, get on the phone with her, don't expect too much, but just tell her what you want. And I called her and I was like, look, like I don't have this technical experience, but I have X, Y, and Z. And this is where I see myself in. This is a role I want to be in. And at the end of the day, she gave me that shot. But the caveat is, and I think this is where it comes down to the portfolio, like Chris, you're mentioning, is my portfolio was those last couple of months as an intern. I didn't get paid. And that was something I was like, you know what, I'll take it, because for me, I'm hoping one, full time, but the experience that I would get in this startup, I think it would be unbeatable. And so I took those couple of months, bite the bullet. I'm like, you know what? I'm praying this is going to turn full time, but I'm just going to take the experience. And I worked my butt off, and I would just pray the day of my graduation. I got the offer, and that was the best time. I was like, okay, I got it. But yeah, I just think that this process is hard, and just keep going, and you have to tell yourself to keep pushing through. And whether that means networking with different people on LinkedIn, like LinkedIn has connected me with so many different people, so many different opportunities, like leverage the people you know, because that's how I got the position. I didn't get it through the keywords, my resume. No, I got it through a phone call. And so that's something I recommend for you guys trying to apply.
I'd love to emphasize that so hard. Like a lot of people, because I'm working at Uber, which is like thought to be prestigious, it always freaks me out a little bit, because I remember pretty vividly when I was applying for internships in my junior year, which I thought was going to be my way into product management. I got rejected before the interview for, I think, 25 places. I got an interview at 2 places, got rejected in the first round from one of them. And then on the last one, I basically like called the recruiter 3 or 4 times, and then emailed him and said, hey, I have a friend who works here and he referred me to you, and got an email immediately and said, oh, if you have a referral from this person, like, go ahead. So leverage your network. Please, like, keep trying. Every no gets you closer to a yes. And I know that product management internship that I had at HomeAway is like a big reason that I was able to get into the product management field, and also just realize that I really liked it. So being in college now, like, try, push on your network. It doesn't matter how many no's you get. It just matters that you get the yes.
I think, let me jump in on that, because some of those themes are probably very similar to my experience. So I literally started off, graduated from college. I was an audio engineer. I was living on a touring bus, doing concerts every day. How I ended up in product from there is a very long journey, but also a very short journey. But I think the thing that like, I kind of wrote down 3 themes as I was listening to other people talk. The first thing is that, even if the job title didn't line up, I was willing to take a job that got my foot in the door, as long as I knew I had access to the right people. So when I was moving from being an audio engineer back into tech, I took a role at Dell. I actually was working in sales. So I was essentially doing like account executive type work. I am not a salesperson. It was a very long year. I was also selling into oil and gas, which is something I know nothing about. And it was it was the year that oil was down. But I took it because I knew that there were roles at Dell I was really interested in that I didn't necessarily have the background for. And so as soon as I got settled into Dell, I started trying to network around my way around the company and meet people in Dell Digital and the internal IT space. And those people became not only my network, but mentors and advocates for me. And actually, I had 4 different roles at Dell in almost 5 years. I never interviewed for any of them. It was always my network saying, hey, we think this person would be great here. So I think you just can't overemphasize the importance of having really great mentors, but also people at the executive level who, even if they're meeting with you once a quarter, are willing to champion you, whether that's at your company or at a company that they know people at. I also think that they can help you sort of get integrated with teams. So like when I was trying to move into Dell IT, I would work during the day, and then I would literally go and do a few hours at night with the network team, shadowing the APJ team to learn networking, because that was how I was going to get those skills that I needed. So I think that if you get into a company and you get settled in the role and you're executing well in your current role, you will have the opportunity then to get to know people in another role. And even if it takes some extra time out of your day, to be able to work on some side projects for them. And that's a great way to kind of audition for the role or build the skills along the way. And it also really helps you learn how to be able to demonstrate impact. So like when I was working at Dell, I worked on a project called Dell Print, which was a very strategic project, and I was in the IT operations space. The reason that I could apply to Salesforce in product management, despite the fact that I was not a PM before at Dell, was because I worked right alongside our PMs as the operations piece that when we pushed code into prod, we took control over it. And so I could demonstrate this is the defect leakage rate we had. I worked to resolve, this many things, but I also ran things like a product. So I actually have papers that I've written. What does site reliability engineering look like when you apply product thinking to it? So I think anything that you can do to kind of get your foot in the door at a place that you can grow as a PM find the right people to mentor and network with, and then apply product thinking and have demonstrated examples, even if it's not in a traditional way, that will take you so much further than just trying to do a bunch of cold applies on LinkedIn.
Yeah, plus one to that. Like product adjacent roles can be a great way to start to get your foot in the door, whether it's operations or product marketing or sales, if you get to work with the product teams a little bit, like there's a lot of interesting opportunities there.
My role before becoming a product manager was, honestly, I think the role I did right before was a lifeguard at Walt Disney World. So as you could tell, very relevant. But I think it still was. I went into that interview and I made it sound like I was solving customers' problems. Now, the customer's problem was they were cold because it was a nighttime and our hotel didn't have a hot tub. But that's not the point, I think. The point was that, even if I was just sitting there, ensuring safety, there we go, buzzword, I was listening. I was listening a lot, and I would hear what the problem was, whether, we had a solution or not, and I would try to find one. And I found that the most annoying thing for me as a lifeguard was not being able to run off stand to grab somebody a towel, or we called it magical moments. We would give people little coupons to our merchandise store. We could get you a free ticket. I felt like the total plug. But even something that just really, you would think had absolutely nothing to do with product management. And when I was doing it, it wasn't even a twinkle in my eye that I would be a product manager. There were transferable skills as long as if you're recognizing them and you can turn that into a story. I think it's all about making what you've done work for you. So I didn't know this is what I'm going to do. So I didn't spend a lot of time trying to figure out how I would get myself there. I just kept trying to do job roles that were really interesting to me. I loved Disney, so I worked there. I went to London to work at a restaurant because I wanted to live somewhere else. And I just think the amalgamation of different experiences, different places, whether it was in pursuit of product management itself, they were all in pursuit of personal growth and experiences in that way. And I think just being able to translate that into how can I use what I've learned for you, even if it's something I haven't done before. Because when I got into the role, I hadn't done any of these things before. I mean, I still am not entirely confident I could explain to you how a microprocessor works or, is made. But I'm learning every day more about that process, and I'm applying the same problem-solving skills I would have taken in lifeguarding, and I'm applying it just in a different way for different chips. I mean, I laugh with my coworkers. These could be potato chips. It doesn't matter to me. I'm still trying to solve the problem of how do I get something into the customer's hands in an efficient way. And make sure we're optimizing revenue. So I think sometimes take a step back and think about what you've already done, and it can also be super valuable. It doesn't have to be a sprint where you got to get every single extracurricular packed into your day. Try to figure out how to make the things that you have done even more valuable.
Thank you. So thank you all so much for sharing your stories. I think it's really awesome. You all had like super different and unique stories. And I think it's exciting to see how excited all of you all were to share your experiences. I think that shows just like people in general, like are willing to share their experiences. So like, if, the people that are listening to this, like y'all are interested in learning more, I feel like you can reach out to anybody. And I feel like people are really willing to talk about their experience and just, tell you how they got where they are. So now we're going to open it up to audience questions. We also have some like further individual kind of more specific questions for the panelists. So we'll just see how the flow of that goes, like how frequently the audience is asking questions and stuff. But yeah, so if anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand through the Zoom feature, and then we'll call on you. And if that slows down or that's not happening, then we have individual questions we'll begin to ask the panelists.
And Ryan, really quickly, I want to echo one thing you just said. Like, people are willing to help is something I've always found. LinkedIn message people, like don't be afraid to reach out to people. You would be shocked, and not everybody's going to respond, but like you would be shocked. People in the industry like love to help other people because everybody got in such a unique way, and usually with somebody else's help. So I just really want to echo that sentiment.
And just a sales tip with that, if they don't respond, always follow up, because they're probably busy and they probably read it and they're wanting to get back to it, but they forget. But follow up is key. Like there's a difference. And I always tell people between being pushy and being like being perseverance, like they're two different things. And if you want something and the difference between you getting what you want is that person and that person can introduce you to somebody else, like then do it, right? Like keep pushing and keep following up.
And my LinkedIn tip while we're on the topic, when you connect with someone, if you don't know them, please send like a little note in there that says why you want to connect with them. I get so many connection requests a day and I just have absolutely no idea who these people are. I don't have anything in common, like no mutual friends. We're not working for the same, we don't use the term friends, connections in LinkedIn, I guess. We don't work for the same company, and it's like, it doesn't give me anything to go off of. So when you connect with someone, if you personalize and just say, hey, so-and-so, I'm really interested in this piece, or I saw that you went to school here and was wondering if we could connect, like just give people something to go on, and they're going to be so much more likely to be willing to chat and engage with you.
Okay, so while we're waiting for people to come up with questions and raise their hands, and guys, feel free to ask anything. There are no bad questions. If you have anything you're wondering, just click the raise hand button and you can go ahead and ask the panelists. And it looks like we have one now. Emmanuel, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a quick question. So Madiha mentioned some of her favorite books. I'm curious what other PM books or resources that you guys like.
Yeah, one book I really like is Inspired by Marta Kagan. I think that's a great one. And he just did a follow-up recently, Empowered, which talks more about managing product teams. Like those are both super interesting books.
I think for planning how to interview for a PM, the sort of gold standard that at least we're taught in MBA is the Lewis Lynn books. So I always highly recommend people check those out. They teach product frameworks. As far as books about product, I mean, there's so many good ones. The one that I like that's a bit off the beaten path is a book called Mismatch. It's by Kat Holmes. She was Google, Microsoft, now at Salesforce. So yes, I'm a little biased, but she talks about how inclusion has shaped design. Which is something that I think is really important, understanding accessibility and how we make accessible products. So I think it's a quick read and it's a fantastic book. Not related to product management, but also I think the Phoenix Project is fabulous if you just want to understand more about what it's like to be on the developer side of things and better empathize with devs and understand what this whole concept of DevOps is.
I think there's also a lot of resources that aren't product management specific, a lot of design stuff, engineering stuff, leadership stuff that's really, really relevant. Two books I always recommend. Sprints, I don't remember who it's by, but it's about Google design sprints. Super fascinating, really good principles in there. And then another one that I'm actually currently reading is The Culture Map by Aaron Meyer. I don't know about other product managers, but I work with people from literally all over the world. At one point, I had people with 9 time zones on my team. And it's really, really interesting to learn about, the different cultures and how different business cultures operate. And it's been super helpful in, understanding why I do things the way I do things and also the way other people work. And as a PM, a huge part of your job is making sure that, you're putting other people in the positions to succeed and that everybody's able to kind of do their best work. And so I thought that one has been really eye-opening for me too.
No, this is probably a little not great for me to say. I don't read a lot of books about product, but there are 3 newsletters that I typically recommend. I love reading newsletters kind of just to start my day and ground me a little bit. So there's Straw Techery by Ben Thompson. There's, I forget what the newsletter, I think it's just called Ben's newsletter, but Ben Evans, if you just Google Ben Evans newsletter, and then Lenny's newsletter. These are just 3 people that are incredibly intelligent, people who think about tech strategy all the time. And what those allow me to do and even allowed me to do in college was just get an idea without being able to work at, 50 different companies, an idea of like how certain companies have handled these big questions of strategy and engage with the analysis of like whether that's the right thing to do or whether what they're doing wrong, what they're doing right, what they could do differently. And that proved really helpful, not only for interviews, but just like to give me some level of knowledge when I'm actually doing my job.
Thanks, y'all. Okay, so while we're waiting people to raise their hands, and also if people listening, you feel like you're shy or whatever, okay, just kidding. Gabriel, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Gabriel. I'm from Brazil, São Paulo, and I worked a year as a product owner, and now I'm looking to work in my second formal experience as a product manager or owner. And back in the suggestion of the product owner have a portfolio, which is not usual, but I think it's also a very good idea. Actually, I'm working together with UX/UI designer to develop a portfolio for us. And then I would like to know what you guys have tips about creating that portfolio. Today we have no code, which can help a lot who don't knows how to code. So in that area, how are your soft things?
Yeah, I think I can probably answer that, Gabriel. So just for an example, I couldn't write a single line of code. I've never been able to, maybe a line of SQL, but that's just not a skill that I've ever had or ever needed in my job. And when I was doing my portfolio and case studies, I didn't write a single line of code. I did work with the designer on one project, but it can be as simple as showing that you can think the way a PM thinks, outlining problems, focusing on user needs, and really clearly and concisely saying, hey, here's a problem, here's the value, here's how I think we should solve it. And then, showing that you can get feedback. And there's a lot of ways to do this. Like you don't need to go and develop an app. Like if you can do that and you want to do that, that's awesome. That's another great way to show you can do the work. And people do that all the time. But for me personally, I didn't want to spend all the time developing an app. So I just said, here's how I would do it, wrote about it. And just doing that went a really long way. So, there's a bunch of different ways. Don't feel like there's one way to do it. But as long as you can kind of frame and say, hey, here's how I would think through something if I was in that situation, here's some steps I might take, that's showing right there that you can think like a PM. So.
Yeah, agreed with Chris. Like you can, if you walk through your process as part of one of those portfolio things and you're like, yeah, here's the problem, the hypothesis I had, lean style. I did, interviews of end users and I figured out what they wanted and we put a design together and, this is what the right thing was to build. This is what the acceptance criteria would be. Here's what the marketing plan would be. Like there's a lot of things you can do without even having to use a no code or a low code tool. You can even just come up with a plan. So.
Awesome, thanks y'all. Next we have Sufyan.
Hi. First, I want to say thank you guys for putting this together. It really means a lot to learn from different perspectives on product management. My kind of question is kind of geared towards like a devil advocate perspective. When you go into a product management role or any role, and generally speaking, you're going to be facing some failures or so. So when it comes to being a product management, what can you say those failures might be, and what are ways that you guys can pivot from them or adapt to those certain situations, if that makes sense?
I think that's a hard one. I'll really quickly chime in. I think that one of the biggest reasons failure happens, at least in my experiences with product management, is because you didn't really know what success was. Like you weren't measuring properly. You didn't really know what done meant or what sort of like the milestone was that you were hitting. I think that tends to be the biggest reason, because that leads to, I think, the reason why failures can be really detrimental is like the slow failure, right? When something like is failing, but you don't really realize it until 6 months after you should have made an adjustment. The best failures are the things that fail fast. When you hear people say fail fast, like that's the best, because you're like, whoa, that was the wrong thing. And you hurry up and you change course, right? And you get different stakeholders involved or whatever. It's the slow burning failures that are the hardest. And those are the ones that have impacted the companies that I've worked at where there have been, big failures the worst. So that's the stuff that I would say is the big keys to prevent.
Yeah, I think some failures I feel like I've been a part of, the biggest thing is convincing people that it's okay to let go. and say, you know what, this isn't working, and that's okay. We'll find something else that works. But throwing more time and energy into a product doesn't always make it a better product. Sometimes it's just not what people want, and that's gonna happen. I think one of the lucky things I feel like working at a really big company is I walk in every day saying, you know, I'm not the reason this company is gonna fail. It's too big for me to take down alone, though some would question if I'm really trying. But so that gives me the comfort to take big risks and know that when it's not going to work, I'm going to say, this isn't working. I made a mistake and we should try something else, and take ownership of what that solution is going to be. So being able to say, yeah, that's not it, is sometimes not enough. To say that's not it, and this is where we're going to go next. Here's what the next thing is going to be. And I don't know if that's going to be right, but I think giving people a solution helps them let go a little bit as well, to say, okay, so yeah, I agree that's not right, and we have someplace to go. I always say, don't run away, run towards something.
Awesome, thank y'all. Next we have Kelly.
Yeah, hi. So I kind of had two questions in one. I was really curious about whether there is any typical day-to-day schedule or itinerary for a lot of PMs, or would you say like the role is a lot more dynamic than just that, and there's like a lot that can change on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis? And then also how big picture the role is, and how much of it is actually like very hands-on and like working directly with the like many moving parts involved in product development.
I can take the second one for sure, and then I'll see if anyone else wants to chime in the first one. If not, I can take that one as well. I think it really depends. So like your scope, but also the level that you're tactical versus strategic, depends on the company. And when I talk about PM, I like to say that there's sort of this like technical PM is over here, PMM is over here, product somewhere in the middle. You kind of fit on the spectrum, and where a product manager, where they fit on that spectrum, as well as how big their piece of that spectrum is, depends on the DNA of the company. So startups, for example, if they have one product person, tend to have someone who's doing the whole spectrum. Somewhere like Salesforce, I have a very small piece of the spectrum that I go very deep in. But I would say also, like, I'm a strategic PM. So I am partnered with about 100 different, we would call them service owners, other people would probably call them dev teams, and working with the TPMs who are running more of the day-to-day of that. There's also people even further above me that are doing strategic, not just quarter to quarter, but strategic year to year. So I think for Salesforce, we have levels of strategy, and we also have levels of operations and tactical versus strategic and more roadmap. So it really depends on the needs of the organization and how they sort of slice things up, but also where you fit in the organization. That's my experience at Salesforce. I can tell you my experience at Dell was quite different. So I really do think it depends on the company. And one of the things I would encourage you, if you're interviewing for a product management role, is to ask, like, where on the spectrum does it fit? How much of the spectrum would I be expected to own? Is this more operational or strategic? I think all of those things are really important, because I can tell you, like, there's certain places, like if I'm super PMM on this spectrum and I'm expected to do things very tactically, I'm not going to be a good fit for that. That's not where my strength is. I'm a strategic player, non-functional requirements, technical. I know my strengths. And so I think there's something to be said for recognizing whether or not you're a good fit and asking those questions in the interview process.
I think the thing that I'll add here, and a lot of the time the answer to questions will be like varies by company, varies by role. At least for an entry level PM, for what I've seen, the day-to-day life of a PM changes by company, by role, but like very much depends on what the team needs. And I think the thing you'll hear, an analogy you'll hear a lot from PMs, is that they're a gap filler. So doing rotations at Uber, in my first 6 months, like we didn't really have a data role, so I ended up doing a lot more querying than I thought I was going to do. And then in my next 6 months, we had a very, very junior designer. So I started doing a lot more in Figma and doing a lot more designs. And then in the last 6 months, we've like had a good bit of the other roles, so I've been able to lean into the strategic parts of things. So that day-to-day nature really does depend on like what your team needs, depending on which projects you're working on, what stage of the roadmap your team or your project or your area is on, and what you can do in order to like get your product to achieve success. Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters. It's not, whether you're really, really great at like design or coding or SQL. It's much more about like, does your product do what it's supposed to do at the end of the day? That's what you're responsible for.
And just to add on, and I know really quick because we're almost at time, but in terms of like the experience from a startup level, yeah, it's like very different. I came in and they had a need feature that they needed to launch. And even though technically I'm an associate product manager, in startups, titles don't really mean anything. It's just like whatever you got to do, you got to do. And so I'm leading that product feature. And some days, like I was given an assignment and then 2 weeks later, they're like, scratch that, we're doing this. So you got to pivot and you got to learn just like, things move around all the time. And sometimes, especially with time zones, like we have our engineering team in Pakistan. So I'm usually doing sometimes meetings at like 11:30 p.m. to 1 a.m. And I mean, I get to sleep in, don't get me wrong, but like, it's like, it varies. It just depends. And you just have to have that like mindset of like, you're consuming everything that you need to do, especially early on in your career. Like you're just a sponge and you're consuming and you're asking questions and you're being curious, and that will just lead you to a different level and get more responsibility. And even with me, like sometimes I'm in the strategic conversations. And so I know from my level of like, okay, where's the strategy, where this is going? And then at the other end, like I'm doing sketches on Envision. So it's very on a broad spectrum, to say the least, specifically in a startup environment.
Thank you all for that response. And as we come up, we have a couple of minutes left here. I will call out in the chat again, Cole Hunt has sent the feedback form again, just now that you've heard the panel. If you have any feedback, if you thought it was great, let us know. If you thought we could have improved, let us know. Just please fill it out. Helps us understand how these events are going and how we can improve in the future. And for any of the panelists, if you all need to leave right at 6 or whatever, please feel free just to say goodbye in the chat or whatever. But otherwise, we'll finish up the last of the hands raised. So it looks like we have Kashav up next.
Hey guys, thanks for coming to the panel. So I had two questions. First, towards everyone on the panel, I was wondering how has sort of remote work impacted your management strategy? Like how has it been like to talk to people virtually, and how's that helped or hurt building that trust, which you guys talked about earlier, which was very important? And then I was also wondering, this is more specific to Olivia. I'm actually a engineering design intern at Intel. I was just curious, could you talk a bit more about like what a PM at Intel does? Because like from my perspective, I was like, well, Intel is like very like engineering, like just optimizing certain key benchmarks of focus. It's like what role does the customer and PM role play in designing a product, which I at first thought was very much like engineering driven?
So I'll answer both a little bit. So for the first part, virtually, I think it's actually been helpful for me in a way I didn't expect. I'm very young, and a lot of my counterparts are not, I get asked all the time where I got my MBA just because they assume that I'm an older human. So I found virtually when I don't have to, at Intel, we don't really turn the camera on a lot, and it's on my team at least. So it's been helpful in terms of hiding how old I am, and so I can kind of pretend I'm a little older or got a little more experience under my belt. And so I've liked that, but I do agree it's harder to make the connections with stakeholders that I may not have met before, just because we don't have the fun little coffee break chat where I can talk about just myself, which I feel like is how I got the job, was really just being a person they thought they would like to work with. And then Intel specifically, I think we call it a product manager. There's, so as Sarah was talking about before on the spectrum, there's a product marketing engineer. So they're gonna actually focus on the engineering side of making specs that work. So, how many EUs do we want at certain core levels, things like that. And then they basically hand off that roadmap to me. and I take it and I run with it for how long are we going to run this product? Who's taking this product? How much are we going to build with this product? I'm very tactical. I kind of feel both sides. I'm very tactical. So on one side, I'm working, with build plans at the weekly level per SKU, and we're talking, thousands of SKU of MMs. I'm confused constantly. And then on the other hand, I'm making decisions of, okay, we're gonna end of life that product, and you're never gonna see it again. And so at Intel, I feel like I'm very much a middleman between the factory and the customer, and our internal marketing teams. And I'm just kind of taking my little Excel pivot tables and spreadsheets and making them and sharing them with whoever has a question for me.
Cool, thanks.
I think one thing to chime in real quick is that I think artifacts are becoming a lot more important as we move to remote work, like documenting the decisions that y'all came to, because like, I don't know about all the other PM's calendars here, but I'm assuming your calendars probably look a little nutso like mine does. And so like, it's like, I need less meetings. And so like documentation, like Google is your friend. If you haven't played with Miro before, Miro is really awesome. It's like live whiteboarding. Like we've been really having a field day with Miro. So think about like how you can take decision-making and collaboration and bring it into some of these remote tools. That's been a really huge help for data.world.
Miro's awesome. Love it.
I'll third that, I guess. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, it is. I would say what we've done at Salesforce, we've put a lot into remote to the point that like I thought I was moving to SF before everything happened with COVID, and I'm actually going to end up staying in Austin and just traveling out there when I need to. But I think the things that have made the difference, one is that each of our teams have a team agreement or a team contract that outlines, how we communicate, where our artifacts are stored, what types of artifacts are expected. That's been great. We have Slack and we do a virtual stand-up every day. So it happens on your time zone because I have teammates in, I think, 8 time zones right now. And we've got fun questions in there, like what was the best part of your day after work? And so I feel like I get to know my teammates. I've never met any of my teammates in person, by the way. I've been with Salesforce for 10 months. I've never met them. So I think those 2 things help. One of the things I really like, there's a company called Automatic, and they were one of the pioneers in this remote first place. And they talk about the stages of maturity in remote work. So I would really recommend looking up that article and figuring out, because when you realize that remote work is not just let's dump the office inside people's living rooms and see what happens, when you recognize it is async work, it is better communication, it is different communication, it is making hours flexible to people's schedules. Like when you start looking at remote work as a transformative piece instead of as just a lift and shift, it dramatically changes the remote work experience.
Thank you all for those answers. And again, if any of you have to leave, just let us know in the chat. And thank you all so much for coming. I think this has been super helpful for all the students, and I hope that y'all could learn something from each other as well. As as we've seen, y'all all do very different things, despite all being under kind of that product blanket. So thank you so much. And then we still have one hand up, Rahul.
Hey, so I know some of you guys have sales experience. You guys come from a sales background. So what were your biggest takeaways from that? And as somebody who's interested in both sales and PM, I'm kind of on the fence about what to do. Did starting in sales make it harder or easier for you to transition into? And I'm sure you guys have friends that might have done the same thing. So if you could speak on that, it'd be very helpful.
Yeah, I think for me, sales really helped me because at the end of the day, product's all about like what the customer wants, right? And you're always having conversations with the customers, and specifically like in a startup, it's all about relationship building because people don't know you. And so engaging in those conversations, and when you're going into features and you're understanding what features you want to launch, like having that customer insight on what's their concerns, what are their insights, like it's super valuable. One, because they know that their opinions are being heard and their concerns are being heard and you're addressing it. And 2, they come up with ideas, honestly, and that really helps us and kind of branches out our scope of thinking as well. So from that end, it really helps with relationship building and like prying more into the questions, because we interview a lot of users, we interview our customers, and you have to really be able to understand how to ask the right questions and how to get the information, because on the surface, sometimes the customer doesn't know what they want, but then when you pry more and you're asking those why questions, then you get to really uncover that need. And that's something that sales taught me that I think really helped me in this role that I'm in right now.
Yeah, so I would say I think my sales experience was really valuable. I may not have even necessarily recognized it at the time, but it's something that has continued to pay dividends to me. The customer piece is absolutely vital. I can't overstress that enough. If you can't explain who your customer is and how your product affects them or makes their life better, which is essentially what you do in sales, then you will struggle as a PM. That's not to say that you have to get that through sales, but I do encourage people. One of the things I did at Dell when I had a team was I would often encourage them to go sit on the sales floor and not only talk to the sales reps, but listen to the sales reps' conversations with customers. I think it builds customer empathy, which is really important. The other thing I think it builds is business alignment. So, and this is, I guess, to go back to my time working at Dell, not necessarily Salesforce. I moved from sales into Dell Digital because I had the ability to say, okay, when this piece of our infrastructure goes down, or when this feature goes down, or when this happens, this is the business impact of it. And that changed our perspective from saying, oh, this piece of Dell sales application went down. What does that mean for IT? We don't really know. To, okay, that went down, it affects reps this way, it affects customers this way, understanding that exact value chain, which gives IT that alignment. And so I think anything that you can do to better align to the other business units, whether that's sales ops, sales, manufacturing, product, marketing, legal, whoever it is, alignment makes everything easier. But you also get that alignment with the main company's goal. Like, you should be able to say, is my company revenue focused right now? Are they margin focused right now? Is my product going to drive which of those? Is it going to drive efficiencies? Are efficiencies important right now? All of these things are important, but they're always going to be ranked against each other. And so understanding that, like, nobody understands that better than a business person doing sales, because sales is directly metriced on it by comp. As to, I would say you don't have to do sales to do product. I think there's a lot of paths to product. You've seen that. I would just say, talk to salespeople and figure out if it's something that is a good fit for your skill set or not. For me, I was frustrated by sales because I felt like I was being metriced on my ability to hit a quota, sorry. And that wasn't necessarily reflective of my ability to solve a customer's problem. That was really hard for me as someone who's problem solving based. So when I moved into non-functional requirements and I could focus on things like performance and performance leak and defect rates, that was a much better fit for me. And those were metrics that really spoke to me in a way that the amount that I sold didn't necessarily. But I do think that there are people that are really great sales reps and then become really great product managers. So I think it's certainly one path into product.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Again, thank you, everyone. It looks like that was our last question. It's gone a little bit over, so I'll let everyone go. But again, thank you to the panelists. For those that are still here, if you can fill out the feedback form that we have, that'll be super helpful for us in improving. And I hope everyone has a great night. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.